We find many plant materials in common between Japanese and Oklahoma landscapes, and the reason for this is that we have some fairly similar climatic conditions. One of the biggest differences in climate is that the temperatures tend to be more extreme here in Oklahoma, whereas the oceans surrounding Japan tend to moderate the climate a little bit. This tends to put a little bit more stress on plants growing here in Oklahoma, and we also have to use them slightly different in the landscape. This Japanese maple is a wonderful example of that. In Japan, they're grown in full sun, whereas here they would quickly be scorched if they were in that site, so we need to put them in some shadier spots. Another difference is that a lot of plants, including this Japanese maple, tend to grow much larger in Japan. Another one is the Deodar Cedar Cedrus deodara, as well as rhododendrons and nandinas seem to reach really great heights over in Japan. Now, horticulture is certainly an international industry. We've been moving plants from one country to another for centuries, and this has brought crops from one corner of the world to the other and has also brought us many new, exciting ornamental plants. One of the dangers of moving plants across borders is that sometimes a plant that's particularly aggressive can escape cultivation and become invasive in the landscape. A great example of that is the spread of kudzu throughout southeastern United States. For this reason, the movement of plants is highly regulated by the United States Department of Agriculture, and it's important that we never move a plant from one country to another. Most often, this exchange of plant material is relatively harmless, and it has resulted in the great diversity of plant material available in our garden centers today. Among these, we grow many plants from Japan, such as the Japanese Maple Acer palmatum and the Japanese black pine, Pinus thunbergii, as well as the sawtooth oak, Quercus acutissima. We also grow a number of Japanese shrubs, including Nandina domestica and the Japanese camellia, Camellia japonica, as well as some herbaceous ornamentals, one of my favorite being the hardy Begonia, Begonia grandis. Some of our favorite grasses originate in Japan as well as some of the surrounding countries, including this maidenhair grass. This is Miscanthus sinensis. Another good example would be the Mondo grasses, which aren't true grasses. These are plants in the genus Ophiopogon. Of course, the Japanese also grow plants native to the United States. One plant that we were surprised to find flowering in a Japanese garden was the oak leaf hydrangea, Hydrangea quercifolia, and this is one of our Oklahoma proven plants. Interestingly, we have a couple of Japanese plants among our Oklahoma provens, and this includes the Japanese painted fern, Ethereum nipponicum, as well as the Japanese Kyria, Kyria japonica. There are, of course, plenty of plants grown in Oklahoma and Japan that come from other parts of the world. This tree here, Ginkgo biloba, is a wonderful example of that. This is an ancient tree that originated in China, and we found it planted widely along the streets of Japan. We also saw plenty of hollyhocks, oxeye daisies, and other flowers from around the world. Another Chinese plant that we saw widely planted in Japan is the leatherleaf mahonia, Mahonia bielii. And this was one of the few plants that actually seems to grow larger here in Oklahoma than it did in Japan. Now, these are all wonderful plants to consider using if you're going to be planting a Japanese style landscape. You also might consider using native relatives of some of the same plant material that we saw in Japan. A good example would be planting our native wisteria in place of the Japanese wisteria or the Chinese wisteria, which is commonly planted. When you're using the more traditional Japanese species, you do want to remember to consider sun exposure because the plants are going to need much more shade here in Oklahoma than they do in Japan.